minutes late. Sorry for the wait. Good to see some of my mods here. Thanks, Sharon, for reassuring folks. Robin Anderson, North Carolina, good to see you. Frank, Frank's here. Grayson, Batman, as usual. So we're going to go through about 7 different things in this live stream. We're going to go through the Laundrie search, how I think the strategy needs to be different. It's going to seem quite intuitive. We're going to go through rumors. We're going to go through a detailed timeline, certainly certain aspects of the timeline. And we're going to go through, if there's time, we'll go through a little bit of Ernest Becker right at the end, just from this little book. And then we're also going to go through paying attention to other cases. And what's the other thing here? And then I'm going to start off with a little anecdote that's going to kind of set everything up. So Angela says, waiting for you all day. I must also say sorry about, I think I first set the time for 12 noon. And so a lot of people pitched up and yeah, so sorry about that. It's actually supposed to be midnight my time. A Stitch in Crime says, watching from Maine. Let me ask you guys a quick question. Based on the fact that I think a lot of us are here, a lot of us are looking at this case with kind of a question. It's resonating for a whole bunch of reasons, but the question a lot of us are asking is, what is reality here? So what is reality? Where is Brian? Where is he? What is the reality? Where do we need to search for him, right? In the Webb incident, that was what people were wrestling with as well. I'm talking about at the time. What is reality, right? What's actually going on? And so where do you get the reality in a situation like that? Well, they've got to explain it to you. And people sometimes emphasize certain things and sometimes they minimize certain things. And so reality can kind of shift. Reality right now is shifting quite a lot with this case, with different characters arriving. For how long has it been this sort of sense that they're going to catch Brian Laundrie at any moment, that dog is closing in, right? Is he closing in? What is the reality? And so that's part of why we're here. Let's look at some of your comments. Elizabeth says, do you think he has been planning this for a while? Something like being a fugitive is different to committing a crime, although it's, I guess, criminal as well. So the planning and the strategy of the person doing it is ongoing. So, and it's also something that they can change. So let me give you quite a silly example of what I'm saying. I think the searchers are still searching in the Carlton Reserve, sort of in strategic areas. If they announce, let's say tomorrow, thanks a lot, Marla Kay. If they announce, say, tomorrow or a week from now, okay, guys, we've searched the entire Carlton Reserve. Brian's definitely not there. There's nothing stopping Brian from, after that announcement, going into the Carlton Reserve. There's nothing stopping, in an ongoing search situation, when a search has swept through a particular area and excluded it, it's kind of in the fugitive's interest to go back to that excluded area, right? And that's what makes it so much more complicated. With a crime, the crime is embedded somewhere. There's a crime scene somewhere. Where you have a fugitive situation, it's ongoing. Thanks a lot, Susan Becker. Good to see you here. Sharon says she's a dog fan. Anyone else? Hybrid Pisces is hard for him to move publicly in Florida now. Absolutely. I don't think he is moving. And we're going to deal with the psychology of what is going on here, whether it is more of a kind of an active scenario or whether it's more of a hiding scenario. Which one do you think it feels more like? Dog gives you the impression that he's on the run and he's pursuing him and there's a lot of movement, except there are no results. There are not really any clues. There are no sightings, and we are closing in with real information. It feels like certain things are happening because the FBI go to Brian Laundrie's home. I think they went into the camper to get DNA. I think the DNA is possibly for two reasons. The one possible reason is, if they search certain areas to see if he was there. Another one is if Brian's remains are found, that they can positively identify him. Another one is that there's possibly DNA associated with the investigation into Gabby Petito. And I don't know if you guys know that I think it's just been revealed who the prosecutor is on that case. I'll get to that in a moment. Elizabeth Link, thanks very much for that. Wow, see, there's almost 2,000 people in chat. Okay. Finola says he's hiding, pretending a gator ate him. Okay. He's hiding in some basement, according to Sammy. Kathy says, I love dogs, but I can't get 3 cats. I also like cats. As a writer, it is quite a tough decision to get a dog, but you can't take a cat for a walk. And Ilva Bjornsson, I appreciate your analytical viewpoint. By the way, Stephanie is going to be joining us, I think, at the end of the hour, so around about 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Miss Gray doesn't think he's alive anymore. I think that is definitely something to consider. One way that you might not find someone is, well, they are no longer alive, right? I think as time goes by, that possibility is going to gradually increase, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Dirty Walter, I feel the same. I think the one thing just to consider is, as much as a lot of people disparage Brian, he did love Gabby. She was his world. And for whatever the actual circumstances, in a weird way, his world has come to an end. And often when you look at scenarios such as mass shooters, thanks, Julie, good to see you here, when their world ends, and I've written a book on mass shooters called Slaughter, when their world ends, they take a lot of people with them. And so you can have a scenario of someone who's in that state doing that with one person themselves or with many, many people, as in certain of those mass shooters. So I don't really know exactly what his state of mind is, but is he emotionally compromised? He could be, he should be, because he's lost his world. His whole world has kind of been torn apart. He's not at home wherever he is, although he probably is wanting to be in a comfortable situation within that situation. A couple of things I think we need to do in terms of Brian is if you think about who he is in a very, very basic way, he reads books, right? A lot. He sketches a lot. You can almost regard him as an artist. I think he regards himself as an artist. He watches TV, based on him sketching The Simpsons. We know that he watches a certain amount of TV. You'd only know that from his parents how much he actually watches. I get the sense that he's kind of a news hound. He's also someone that is online a lot. That's the impression I get. He maybe doesn't want to be online a lot, but he is online a fair amount. He seems to be into Star Wars, so some of the very classic kind of franchises, right? So although he kind of presents himself as I won't say primitive, but sort of earthy and down to earth, and this barefooted dude, he is also worldly. He's also quite secular in a way. He's got some quite I won't say worldly, but quite sort of modern. Modern is also not the right word, but he's got some views that are of a particular persuasion. I don't want to be too specific about that. Bob says a lot of learning to do. Moon Maiden says she's a poser, basically. Let me ask you guys a question, and this also comes back down to perceptions of reality and just knowing basic things, asking very simple questions, knowing the basic things, right? So let me ask you this. How many days has Brian been missing? Christina Jansen, Brian is alive and well. She says he's hiding in a trailer and his family knows where he is. Okay. So Heather Jordan, that's a really good answer. He's actually been on the run technically for 30 days, right? It's since he left the Wyoming area, the Spade Creek camp. It's basically been 30 days since he left Gabby's remains, right? So technically, he's kind of been on the run in his reality, for 30 days. He's been escaping Gabby's permanent disappearance, right? In terms of the Florida narrative, it's been about 16 days. It's been more than 2 weeks, right? In terms of what... I'm just trying to think now, because the question I posed in the previous video, why did it take so long to blah, blah, blah? Well, the same thing applies with Brian's parents. Why did they take so long? Why did they take 3 days? It's not as though Brian lived somewhere else. He lived with them. They would know that he wasn't there. So it's quite difficult where you start the clock. Do you start the clock when they informed the authorities or when he actually went missing? And when did he actually go missing? That selfie taken by the family at the campsite next door isn't necessarily Brian. Could be Brian, but if it's not Brian, then the head start he has could be, you could shift it along the timeline quite dramatically, right? But the point is that Brian has been eluding the pursuit of him for a really long time. It's actually a month. And if you argue with that and say, no, it's since he's been on the run, well, then it's at least 2 weeks. That's quite a long time. He's done far better than Chris Watts. And so the question is, how much longer? How much longer do you think he's going to stay away? I think that there's what that depends on is quite a few things. It depends on whether the search strategy changes. It also depends on his state of mind. It depends on his state of mind. Is he someone with a resilient state of mind? Is he a determined person? Well, the summer epic tends to show that he couldn't handle anxiety, he couldn't handle tension. He eventually lost his nerve. Well, will that happen again? Will that happen again over a similar period of time? In the summer epic, you could argue that he lasted 6 weeks or 8 weeks. So you could potentially argue that within 6 to 8 weeks, so he's going to unravel again. He may even hand himself in. Sharon says, if you see a troll, please tag her. Please do. There have been some really nasty comments in the previous video, I guess, from people who didn't watch it. Kathy says, could Brian be out of the country? Could be. I'm not convinced of that. I think he's still in Florida. But as time goes by, everything changes. I think you could have a situation of Brian staying put, sort of sitting tight, and then a situation where he suddenly moves, just like you had in Wyoming. So he sort of is in a static situation, to use their term, to use his term, static. I mean, theoretically, Brian could have left Wyoming on the 27th, right? Theoretically. But he chose to stick around for kind of 3 more days, and then he left on the 30th, right? And then he moved very, very quickly. So it's staying in one place, moving very quickly. That same psychology may be happening here. In a way, you could also say when he was at home in Florida, he was back to the static phase. Is he going to go to the nomadic phase very soon, or is he in the nomadic phase? But I do think you need to consider that with a fugitive. It's movement, stop, movement, stop. And the longer the time goes by, the better the chance that at some point he is going to move somewhere else. And that's going to make it harder and harder to find him, although someone might see him. Let's look at some of your comments. Lib Skipper says, I don't think he'll be found. Bear in mind, only a month has gone by. I think it's, in a way, a lot easier finding a living person than someone who's like Summer Wells. I think sometimes a living person that is trying to hide has got to be maintained. A dead person that someone is hiding away, although there can be some maintenance there, like maintenance of the grave and whatever, control. A living person uses up far more resources, and we're going to get to that as part of what the search strategy needs to be. Well, there's actually a fly buzzing around here, which is odd because we're coming out of winter. There are not really that many insects. Speaking of, I want to talk to you guys about a spider, and then we're going to go into what I really want to deal with, the analysis. Thanks for that, Brenda. Farm girl Yaya, I think you said something quite necessary in your comment. I think I pinned it, so I just want to acknowledge you. Farm girl says, I believe he's alive and not far from home. I think that's quite likely. I think he's a lot closer to home than people think. Is he camping, or is he camping inside a house, or is he camping inside a basement? Pauline Buckle says, remember how long Elizabeth Smart was missing? Line says he's alive. How could his parents be so calm otherwise? That's a good point. A really good way of looking at this is not looking at the thing you're looking at. Look at other things that, actions speak louder than words. Tracy says, it sure seems like parents are helping him, ! Good point. But how? How are they helping him? And it's only his parents that are helping him. Moniz Smoke says it would be smarter to have him in a house or cabin, ? So the true crime rocket science is kind of that is, and again, this is subject to the timeline. You might say 6 months from now. You were saying all along that he was in an abandoned house, but we found him on the blah, blah, blah. Well, where was he at the time? But I do think you've got to consider almost the gray third area. What I mean is, so the true crime rocket science position is very likely in a structure, right? He's not like in a tent or hiking or in the outdoors or in the Colton Reserve or sitting in a tree or playing naked and afraid. He's in some kind of structure, right? But you could have something that is between the primitive camping scenario and the Fight Club abandoned house scenario. You could have something that is between them, and something like that is a camping hut somewhere. the DeSoto campsite sort of takes you there in the sense of it's a place that has basic electrical facilities, basic ablutions. But the problem with that scenario where you're talking about kind of a campsite, a public campsite, is, well, exactly what happened there. What people saw them, the laundries. People saw him. So, going to a place like that, it's literally like being in a glass house. People can see when you are cooking often. People can see when you are, what you're doing. The ablutions are public. And that's some of the ways that the van life is, how Gabby was actually seen and Brian was actually seen when they were on their trip, was when they used these public ablutions, these shower facilities. So if you're not in a controlled place like a home, an indoor scenario where no one can see you, and if there's not a car parked out, nobody knows you're there, and you can literally be there for months on end, no one's going to know. The only way someone's going to know is if you go outside. And so you've got this competing psychology that, is he outside or is he inside? Well, if he's outside, it's a lot easier to find him. If you were the most wanted person in America, right? And it may be oversimplifying it to say this. If you're the most wanted person in America, would you want to be outside or inside? Just a very basic question. If you're the most wanted man in America, would you want to be outside somewhere, running around, or would you want to be inside, staying put? If you were the most wanted woman in America, would you want to be would you say, okay, Jeff Probst, this is my own personal survivor, drop me on that beach, or drop me on the top of that mountain, or drop me in that forest, drop me in the Tennessee woods, whatever. Well, it might be fun for a day. You're going to need to feed yourself, wash yourself, clothe yourself. You're going to need somewhere to sleep, right? Where do you want to be? Do you want to be outside for days on end? Do you want to be inside or outside? And another way to think about it is you've been camping already for 2 months. After 2 months of camping, do you want to go camping again by yourself? Maybe you do. Maybe if you're Brian, you do. I don't, and you could argue that they did when they went to the DeSoto campsite. David Christopher says he's in an abandoned home. Imagine if he's trying to crest his own. Yeah, that is definitely a thought. Something that I've observed since I made the video about what Fight Club may tell us is he wasn't actually reading that book at the time. It's a bit of an error I made when I looked at the date. It was actually 2020 where you see her holding that book. It's not actually from the Summer Epic. So although I think that's formed his psychology to some extent, it's influenced his psychology, I don't think it's not like it's like his Bible. I think it is certainly part of what of his makeup, of what has inspired him. I think Chris McCandless potentially is someone that he thinks about and perhaps idolizes, and who knows, maybe he'd want to go to Alaska, and maybe he would want to follow the narrative of Chris McCandless, including the conclusion. I don't know. I don't know if he's as tough as Chris McCandless, though. Sweep Singh says no man is an island. Yeah, I mean, so the thought that Brian is in a canoe island hopping, to me is very unlikely, because the line of sight to someone canoeing is you can almost not get more line of sight than that. So if someone was looking for you, putting yourself in a canoe in a little boat surrounded by nothing in all directions is almost the dumbest thing you can do, because it just would be so easy to find you. So almost as crazy as standing on a beach somewhere And then the next level of that is like going on a hiking trail. If somebody found you and you wanted to escape, it would be quite difficult, right? But we've also got to be careful. You can, as a true crime community, you can say that would be the best thing. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that this guy's making the smartest choices. He's 23 years old. He may not be making choices we'd expect or decisions that are the smartest decisions. And that's why you've got to anchor your analysis, your trying to read his mind, in his mind, not in like almost like projecting your own thing onto the situation. So for me, something like saying he's on the Appalachian Trail, just because he mentioned the Appalachian Trail, to me, why on earth would you do that? I mean, has he not considered that? Is he not anticipating what people are going to anticipate about him, right? He apparently has been selectively deleting things, so you would know people, he would know that how much his Instagram is increasing. In fact, I just saw recently that the followers has gone down from, I think, 40 to 39. I think it was 41 at one point. Now, I don't know if someone's blocking him or whether he's unfollowed somebody else, but it looks like another person, another whatever, has been unfollowed. I don't really have that list. Grizzly Books True Crime might know that. Sharon says, please be kind in chat. Okay. Just see if there's any more I want to touch on before we get going. I guess we have been getting going, but I'm talking about according to this menu I've got. So I'm going to start off by saying something that is going to be very, it's going to sound totally counterintuitive and it's going to sound crazy, right? And I'm going to repeat this throughout this broadcast. We need to search for Brian Laundrie by not searching for him. Let me say that again. We need to search for Brian Laundrie by not searching for him. And I'm going to explain as we go through this what I mean by that. So the title of this episode, this live, is that he heard voices, that he struggled with insomnia. We're going to do rumor control and we're going to explore the detailed timeline. As much as I want to explore the detailed timeline, I don't think there's going to be time to go through it from end to end. So I'll probably highlight aspects from the detailed timeline. What I am noticing is a lot of people that are following this case seem to think they know the case and there are things that they're not familiar with. I think 70% of people didn't know that Gabby was sort of on the phone during the Moab incident. Now, we don't know if she did make a call. She may have tried to make a call. I don't know if she succeeded. But, there is something that is kind of obvious that is out there. All of that footage on body cam that some people haven't even watched from beginning to end. That is Brian and Gabby on the same day in the same place, being asked questions. And it's the most footage we have of both of them. And I have been wanting to deal with it, but there's been just so much other information coming out that I haven't quite gotten to it. I probably will be doing it sort of in the coming week in a series. Those of you know my Sermon on the Mount series and Sermon on the Porch series. This is going to be similar to that. So the other thing I want to touch on before I get going is Gabby's father, Joe, complimenting and thanking social media, saying that, that social media has been instrumental in helping in the search for Gabby, but has it really been helpful in the search for Brian? What is interesting with Gabby's father's statement is It's totally different to the Summer Wells case. In the Summer Wells case, even law enforcement have been saying, please, social media, please stop. Please stop sending us clues from social media. So I do think it is very interesting how social media and the media have held hands on this case in a way that I haven't seen before in true crime history. I certainly haven't seen it like this. On the other hand, I must also say when I'm trying to find information, there's sometimes social media will beat the mainstream media to the punch of quite a few things by several days. And then when you Google something, it comes up in your news feed as news, when it's actually not news. It is something that came out quite a long time ago. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. And so you have this odd thing where social media is not necessarily credible, depends on where you go in social media. And then the news finds that stuff out much later, and which is why social media so often has the edge on the media, and yet social media overall is far less credible. Let's just look at your comments. Hannah Kin, watching the reality show alone taught me it's not easy or fun to survive in the wilderness. Absolutely. Jay says the Appalachian Trail is too crowded now. That's a really great point. And I think a very simple way of looking at this, Corporal D, thanks a lot. Do you mean searching in Florida, but the FBI are aware he's in Alaska and hope Brian will relax and think he's free? That's one aspect of it. So one aspect to draw Brian out is to do a Summer Wells kind of thing. Also Barry Morphew, if you guys know those cases. But there's another side to that. I'm going to get to that in a second. Well, I just had, so the thing that I think is very important to bear in mind is be guided by this guy's actions. Look at what he does. Don't project onto it, right? So if you accept that Brian was actually on the run from August 30th, he's actually been, in the real sense of the word, certainly even in his mind, based on his knowledge, for 30 days, right? Not 2 weeks, 30 days. So what was the first thing he did? Well, he kind of established an alibi, arguably. So, he hitchhiked around there without the van, right? He didn't need to be hitchhiking. And that seemed to be establishing an alibi. So in the first couple of days, and then he suddenly transports himself right out of there. He didn't need to drive that fast, that far, but he did, right? So you could take that little scenario as a source material and say, is it going to happen again? Is it going to kind of contaminate the narrative, make it seem like he's going to the Colton Reserve, make it seem like he's going camping, this and that and whatever, and then be out of there, be somewhere completely different. The other thing that I think is really interesting for those who, let's just do a quick poll. How many of you think that Brian is on the Appalachian Trail or headed that way? Let's just have a look. If you think he is, put a 1. If you think he's not, 2. So is Brian somewhere on the Appalachian Trail? Is the Appalachian Trail really important? 1 yes, 2 no. So I just see a couple of 1s, but mostly 2s. Okay, so I'm pleased to see mostly 2s personally. So for those who put a 1 there, let me just say the following. If Brian wanted to go to the Appalachian Trail, right, then he could have and should have and would have gone from Wyoming. He would have gone back to the Appalachian Trail. It's a much longer journey, the one that he took, if he was thinking, well, I want to go to the Appalachian Trail. So it's quite important to stress where was the first place he went after Wyoming, when he was actually technically on the run. he was going to be questioned about Gabby, whether he was directly involved or not. And so, in a way, he's on the run. Where did he run to? Well, he ran home. He ran home. He didn't. He could have gone anywhere. He could have gone to Alaska. He could have gone to another national park. Could have gone to Yellowstone. So this whole thing that he's this uber camper, that he's this barefooted kind of guru, and that he's like in the wilderness. Whoa, I don't think so. The first place he went to was home. So yeah, so I'm gonna talk to you guys about that in a bit more detail. And so, why did he go home? Well, there was a support system for him there, a good one by the looks of it, an effective one so far. And is it continuing? Is he still being supported? Is that why so if you do have a support system, and this is so important to bear in mind, if you're on the run, and you saw this in the movie The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, if you're on the run and someone supports you, then you can kind of relax, meaning you can rely on certain things and you don't need to do other things. In other words, your risk-taking decreases because somebody else is taking risks. Does that make sense? I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit in more detail to that part. I just want to go through it kind of step by step. Nice warm weather, according to Susan Perry. Misdemeanor, great avatar, supported by family. And the question is, where does the family end? Is it mother? Is it mother and father? Is it mother and father and sister? Is it mother and father and sister or somebody else? Is it somebody else? I saw quite an interesting comment here. King Farouk, he went home to mama, is not an independent spirit like McCandless. I do know that he camped for quite a while on the Appalachian Trail. So it is not completely, he does have a bit of an outdoorsy streak, that's for sure. Benita Rainey says, hi, how long ago did it start? Kelly Heffin says to Scout Sniper, I've been asking the same question for a week. Lisa says, I think he threatened his own life to his parents. That is something that Barry Morphew did with Suzanne. And that is a kind of potentially a manipulating tactic, potentially. Corporal D says he had really had to have help to last this long. It does seem that way. And that is why I say the best, it'll make sense in time, more and more sense. Heather West, thank you. The way to search for him is to not search for him. I'm talking about where you sort of go out and you got helicopters and drones, and I'm talking about don't search for him that way. There's so many other ways to search for him than going out on your feet and searching. Brandy, Florida Girl, why did they do that? Really long avatar. Someone says, brother has a criminal justice degree, mom worked for DA as admin. I've heard that. I'm not sure whether that's confirmed, but if it is, it certainly gives you pause that this might not be as easy as people think. I think people have been mocking Brian, calling them dirty laundries. I don't think that's appropriate. I think at the moment he's the most wanted man in America, and he's outsmarting everybody. So I think you've got to, I don't mean respect him like he's just like us or anything like that. I just mean if you don't respect your adversary, and I mean adversary in the true crime sense, then he's going to continue to outsmart you. So you need to have a bit of humility. That's just my personal opinion. Sharon says trolls will be removed. Well, if there are trolls here, Sharon, you don't need to show too much flexibility. There were a lot of really unkind remarks in the previous video. People are saying silly things, just get rid of them. Not necessary. It's not necessary. Karina Costa, Nick, why do you think that he's not dead? Because you don't try to cover up something or flee something if you don't have the will to live. So there's more to that as well, but I don't want to speak too frankly when he's only charged with bank fraud. So I don't want to be too explicit. Bob Van Lara says, did they mean Jackson Hole? And he thought Jackson, Florida. That's why the $200. And then he freaked out. Also, why do they still have Gabby's van? Well, they're processing it for evidence. I think it's also possibly seen as besides evidence, it's something that I don't know whether they foresaw him becoming a fugitive and took the van away as part of that. But for the main reason, I think it's evidence in a murder investigation, and that would be sufficient. Ellie Reese says, I love this channel. Thanks a lot for that. Good golly, Miss Molly. Nick, what do you think about clues related to his favorite books? Well, I have spoken about that in the Fight Club things. It's difficult to say. I think I just before I did this live stream, I was just taking a moment and just concentrating and just thinking in broad sweeps. And I actually forgot to bring the book that I wanted just to present you guys, The Scout Mindset. Like, let's try and just gather information and think about what we're talking about, not have the soldier mindset and say, this is the way it is, and have certainty. Let's educate ourselves. Let's find out about this person. One of the ways to find out about a person is look at the books they read or the content that they consume online. It's what you are reading and focusing on and paying attention on, that is who you are, certainly at that time. So what do the books say about him? I think it shows someone who's quite anti-establishment, someone who's got a bit of a bone to pick with certain elements of society, and to some extent broadly the world. It is kind of antisocial. And that, I think, has been underestimated by a lot of people. He's antisocial in the sense he's got a bit of an attitude to the world, but there's also the Brian from the Moab incident who can smile and be buddies with the cops, kind of thing. Kelly says, Nick, do you think his parents are getting good legal advice? I think they're getting legal advice. Is it good legal advice? That's hard to say. But I do think the fact that they're getting legal advice is helping them early on. If you compare the Laundries to the Wells family, the Wells family could have done with legal advice, given how much they were putting out on social media, the interviews they were giving, and the access they gave to all sorts of people. If you compare the Wells couple to the Laundries, it's chalk and cheese. The ones getting legal advice. I did look at some of the tweets sent out by the lawyer. One's got to shrug at some of it. Gypsy says, I just hope Dog is onto something. Is he? I mean, what I've read just say, he's closing in. How long can you be closing in? But he does have experience, and he, so I certainly am not someone to say, Dog, go home, Dog, give up, Dog, stop. He can, it's fine. Go and look. I personally don't know if it's the right place. If he's indoors, you can look as much outdoors as you like. But what dog is then doing is excluding all those places, which is useful. Is excluding them. Evelyn says he has to be on the Appalachian Trail. Joe Terry says, how far behind could dog be? Perhaps weeks. True. Jacqueline says he's not out in the wilderness. He's safe and with creature comfort. I think he's watching YouTube, he's reading about himself. I think someone who's a reader also is online. It tends to be. Someone who's contemplative, artists are online quite a bit as well. Not that they don't have an exterior distance, just that they are, if you look at the avatars that both Gabby and Brian followed, you see that they have a online personality. There were things that they were particularly interested in. Even if you're following national parks and all these outdoor places, you're nevertheless an outdoor person following outdoor places, but it's within the thing of online. So I don't know if that makes sense. You still have that my digital life going on, right? Which I'm not saying it's necessarily indoors, but it's not like naked and afraid without the phone. It's something else. Do you think he had a psychotic break? I think I hate saying he just snapped because it's oversimplifying things, and if someone just snaps, you can also just snap out of it and break down and say, I'm sorry and confess, and that's the end of the story. So I think there was an escalation, and I do think there were things that precipitated other things. So I think it's a combination of like where you lose your temper, but also a slow boiling, both of those things happening at the same time. Yeah, that's also a really good point. That's also a really good point from KS, that is in plain sight. So that's something that I think you can also lose complete sight of. Is Brian's out there in the wilderness, go into that swamp, go into that wilderness. Meanwhile, there he is walking, and he's got a face mask on, maybe a cap. There he is going into a store, and it's Brian, and he's just in a suburb somewhere. And he doesn't even need to hide away because everyone's wearing a mask. It's not rocket science. The context of the pandemic, I think, is a factor in this case more than a lot of people realize. Driving the anxiety, driving the psychology. Think about what has been going on with lockdown. People have been fugitives in their own home, lots of people, staying at home, sitting at home, camped out at home, can't go anywhere. So you've got experience doing that. Well, now just do it again, except now you're not hiding from a virus, you're hiding from law enforcement. You've been there before, so do it again. Fantastic content. Thanks a lot, DJ Agent. Thanks a lot from Hollywood. Okay. Louise says dog doesn't come out of retirement for publicity. Okay. Pauline says, I don't think he's a happy person, so evading capture might not give him any joy. Well, I think he is getting ego gratification. I think he's feeling, he's certainly getting a lot of social currency out of this, whether it's good or bad. He's feeling significant. He's feeling like he's having an impact on the world in a way. He has a message to give the world, which you see in his very last Instagram post. And so he certainly has been given a huge platform. So I think there's an ego involved here. I think at the same time, if you think of him at Moab incident, there's a little bit of I'm not quite sure what the word is. You have the duping delight side, but I think you also have someone who lacks courage. So there's I think a thrill going on. It's like a thrill ride. It's a combination of ego but also fear, because if he is caught, things aren't going to be very great. He's going to lose his freedom. So I think it's an interesting mindset to be in. Is that freedom real? Christy Lee, I'm not someone who believes in conspiracies, so I know a lot of people talking about that. It's just, I think, a sign of people who think everything is fake, and something happens, it's like this is one big conspiracy and blah blah blah. I don't know. It just shows how disconnected we are from the world, that we can look at the same thing and not have a clue what reality is. One person says it's definitely that. Someone says all of that is fake, and that in a way explains, I think, why this crime happened. It's being unable to live in the real world, and so you deal with it in a way by cheating out of it. SM Kovalinsky, thanks for that. SM Kovalinsky is a patron on Patreon. Also, just a lot of your comments are just really worth seeing and reading and responding to. Corporal D, well, Corporal D, you've got quite a few questions from Australia. Do you think the searcher should have a neutral mindset and search the area? Yeah, you should have a neutral mindset, and you should be trying to gather information, but I think you should start off by trying to find out about these people. I think your search shouldn't be so much on the ground, a topographical search. It should be a psychological search, because it's a search in a way. Searching for Brian is actually searching for how he thinks in a way, and that is also, that strategy may also change over time. It may evolve. As I say, he was in one place to begin with in Wyoming for 2-3 days, and then he moved rapidly. That may repeat in this case even several times. So it could be that whole nomadic static thing all over again. Stay in one place, move very quickly, stay in one place, move, and so on. I'd like to get to all of your comments, but they're coming through so quickly. I did actually put them on slow mode. Jean Karras, good to see you here as well. Hopefully Stephanie will be in the next 4 or 5 minutes. Okay, so something else I want to touch on, just now dealing with some of the notes that I've taken. You're going to laugh, but this does have application on Brian Laundrie. So don't jump all over me when I start talking about this. You might think this is irrelevant, or you're being self-indulgent or something. I want to tell you a little story, and then I'm going to apply it to Brian Laundrie. I actually wanted to open with this. So it's spring where I am, and I'm kind of getting my garden sorted out. I've got a very aggressive jasmine creeper that is actually started pushing down the arch that it's grown. Just literally, the vine's been kind of going like this and literally pushing it down. And I've had to prop it up and just put in braces and all sorts of things just to support this arch. Anyway, just sorting out the garden for spring, raking out all the old leaves and so on. And there's a bird's nest that was in this tangle of dead jasmine. The jasmine above is doing its thing, but there's almost like a nest of the creeper that's not no longer alive. And in that nest, I'd put an actual wooden nest, right? And during this whole process of cleaning it out, I took this nest out, and I know that a bird nested in that tangle. And I thought, why did it nest in the nest, in this wooden nest? And so when I opened the box, there was a spider inside the size of my hand. I don't mean almost the size of my hand. I mean, could easily even have been bigger than the size of my hand. Grace Johnson says, thanks for your excellent thoughts, analytical mind. Thanks a lot, Grace. And I freaked out. I mean, I was actually a little bit sleep deprived, a little bit sleepy, and I woke up. My own hand, my fingers were easily an inch away from this spider. It's known as a huntsman spider or rain spider. They are truly scary. In some ways, they're quite beautiful. They've kind of got furry bodies. Their body is about the size of my thumb, if not bigger. They're not poisonous, but if they bite you, it's really painful. It's a really painful bite. But what I want to share with you is just a neutral, natural scenario when you talk about a fugitive. So what has happened now, and I didn't really mean to do it. I'm quite friendly towards spiders. I'm scared of them, certainly that one. But I tolerate them because, they eat cockroaches and other things. When I looked in that, so I put the nest back somewhere and hoping that the spider would enjoy its home. But the spider's, yes, it's the huntsman spider. The spider has now abandoned that nest, which means that spider is now somewhere in my garden. And I would rather that it was in the nest where I know where it is and it returns there each day than that it's running around the garden somewhere, right? So right now that spider is a fugitive. And if you ask the question, yeah, I was almost screaming. There was a guy standing next to me when it happened. A guy was doing some DIY, and he kind of laughed because I didn't quite do a Homer Simpson thing. I didn't quite do that, but I was definitely just quite a shock, and I sort of bounced up and down with that adrenaline for a little while. But the question is, so where's that spider right now, right? Well, he didn't go back into that nest, and he is likely in the garden right now. But I can tell you now, the most likely place he will end up is in my house or in a garage. But he's not going to be sitting in a tree or curled up under a rock. He's going to try and find a way into something almost as comfortable as that structure, that bird's nest made out of wood structure. He's not going to be sitting in a tree. And I've seen a lot of those spiders come in. Guess when they come indoors? When it rains. And it has rained a lot today. And think of that as an analogy for Brian as well. He's lost his home, right? And is he going to want to run around the forest with all the rain that they've been having, and also winter coming? I don't know if winter's such a factor in Florida, but there are factors like bugs and mosquitoes and mud and just the unpleasantness. It's fine to camp over a weekend, but over the long term, you want your home comforts. So I expect to see that spider in my home, not in the not too distant future. All right. So again, remember I said the best way to search for Brian is not to search for him, right? Now apply that to the spider. I could search the whole garden for the spider, but isn't the spider going to come to me at the end of the day? Do you follow my thinking? You need to think of it from a totally different perspective, from the spider's perspective. Christina Jansen says, please keep him out. Yeah. So the way they do come in is through open doors and open windows, and because it's getting hotter, you tend to leave them open. And so what do? They notice, well, it's actually, the air coming from there is quite warm. There's a warm light there. I'm getting out of this damp, dewy, sticky, muddy spot. I'm going in there. That's going to work better for me. So I thought that analogy was worth sharing with you guys, just to show you just a different way of thinking about it. So again, I want to just say the way you approach the true crime fascination that I think a lot of people have, without knowing why they're fascinated, is we are asking the question, what is reality? In this controlled situation, with this fortress of information that we've got, with facts and information and footage and all this knowledge that we've got, the social media, the body cam, this news reporter told us this lawyer said that family member said this, the friend said this. All of it is different pokes at reality. And so perception is reality, but perception isn't reality. So perception is reality for you, but perception isn't reality. Perception is simply what you perceive. Reality is something else. And we're always catching up to it. In a way, reality is like a fugitive, and we're always trying to catch up. Same applies with Brian. And in a way, you shouldn't be running after reality to find it. You should feel it. Reality is, in a way, self-evident. Batman says, Nick's scared of nothing. Well, I am scared of spiders, although I won't sort of, if I find the spider indoors, I won't kill it. Even though he's a little bit of a threat to Timmy, because he's not poisonous, I'm happy to have it around, although I've got a creeper going over my door, and I'm getting more and more anxious that the huntsman's going to be on there, and if I open the door in a kind of a jarring way, it could fall on me. So yeah, maybe a little bit hyper vigilant. Stephanie, good to have here. He's under your bed, yeah, for sure. Rose says, no spiders welcome in my home or garden. Okay, well that's a little bit sad. No, I'm not going to give it a name. Have I watched Arachnophobia? I have. Yeah, I don't know if I did the Homer Simpson scream very well, but it is interesting that Brian Laundrie is also kind of into The Simpsons. Shows that he's quite worldly, watches cartoons. The question is, again, put yourself in Brian's shoes. If you're going to spend an extended time hiding away, aren't you going to want something to take with you? Well, what would you take? A book? You'd want an internet connection. You would preferably want to watch TV. I think at one point, Gabby says on her Twitter, I've still meant to put up a Twitter post, there are 88 of them, around about 10 a year. I think it goes over 8 years. So it sort of averages one tweet a month if you take all of that. But one of her tweets is, I'm obsessed with Netflix, or I'm addicted to Netflix. And isn't that possibly what he would want to be doing, right? And that flies in the face of this barefooted Tarzan figure that a lot of people are imagining. I think that's an aspect to Brian, but he's also a teenage, a young person, like a young student, like all young students. They like someone to do their laundry. They like, excuse the pun. Do you get what I'm saying? They like things to be fairly comfortable. And we saw Brian and Gabby eating at restaurants and staying in hotels. And her mother did say it was actually turning out to be a really expensive trip. Well, it could have been a lot cheaper if they lived a lot cheaper. The van could have been just 2 stretches inside. Didn't need to have all these little things going on. You didn't need to take pot plants with you. You could have taken sort of, that dried camper food that you just put water in and you boil it, right? Someone says, I just missed that comment. Is Brian's family wealthy? Did he have a rich upbringing? From Christina. It's a good question that is being brought up. I'm not going to answer it right now. I've just taken a lot of flack for my previous video, but it is worth looking into. And the financial flow of information is one way that you can look for Brian without looking for him. Think about that. Hillary says, exactly why I love the show, critical thinking encouraged, stop mob mentality. Thanks for that, Hillary. Netflix and YouTube is popular with young folks. Bear in mind, Brian is 23 years old, and they were trying to set up a YouTube channel. They were trying to set up the Instagram. So there's no reason to think that he wouldn't still be interested in what is happening on Instagram and YouTube. So if you think Brian is somewhere kind of sitting around a campfire, offline, and I don't know, roasting marshmallows over a fire and singing Kumbaya to himself, probably is spending more time looking at social media, is doing exactly what we're doing. Do you think that is very unlikely? It's just not where we're thinking, but I would be surprised if that wasn't the case. If you America's most wanted man or woman, wouldn't you want to know what America is thinking and saying about you? Because it's all over. It's easy to see. So would you just say, I'm going to turn my back on that and stare at the mountains instead? Or would you be interested in what people are saying to you? Bear in mind, this is also in the context of a murder investigation. That's also part of it. It's not just Brian Laundrie is a fugitive. It's also that. Beverly says tarantulas here in the Sierra Mountains. Culture Cave. Nick, can you talk about minimalism and mindsets regarding that in this case? I just think the minimalism is something that is, if you want to go into that area, kind of a deconstructed psychology, similar to what you see in Fight Club. And I've been wanting to do a video about the house in Fight Club as a metaphor for Brian. This person who's trying to deconstruct himself, a person who is thinking about deconstruction as a theme that the world needs, that we need to deconstruct our technologies. Think about fossil fuels and certain companies that one feels is the enemy of the greater good. And so the idea is that is deconstructed. But it takes a deconstructed person to want that. And one of the ways that you see that is with this minimalism, this attitude to kind of a Spartan existence. And that's why I think that this idea of him being in an abandoned house is a indirect and subconscious match for minimalism and that whole thing, this whole deconstructed thing. So I hope that sort of answers your question. There's a lot more to say about that. Wood Pigeon says, I'm the main character syndrome. Sharon Tuck says, use your thumb to slow the chat. It's already on slow mode. Okay. Susan Carr, in the US, you can check into a psych unit or a detox unit, and they are forced to keep your presence there confidential unless you are charged with, which is not. Interesting point. Andar Warje says he probably feels refreshingly relevant. I think he has felt very powerless and very, bear in mind, because he's lived with his parents, hasn't really had a job, hasn't really had an income, has felt, and also in terms of his relationship, has gone from being engaged to sort of not engaged to even broken up. And now Gabby isn't even alive anymore. So I think that feeling of falling out of the game, falling out of society, being insignificant, being powerless, being helpless. This is the flip side of all of that. This is Brian turning the switch on everybody where he's smarter than everyone and where his message is being heard by everyone in a way. People are reading his Instagram. And in that sense, I think I wouldn't say he's happy about that, but I think there's probably a sense of grim satisfaction, a sense of, to some extent, restored. Perhaps not the way he would want it to be restored, but feeling certainly empowered in a way, I think. Grandma Green, thanks for that, Grandma, says, do you think that when Brian was hitchhiking, he had defensive wounds? Quite possibly. Quite possibly. I mean, he had wounds at the Moab incident. Were they defensive wounds or were they just wounds? I think they were both. But I think quite possibly. Why are you wearing long sleeves in the middle of summer? You could argue that in the mountains it does get cooler, colder after the sun goes down. Immediately after the sun goes down, it's quite chilly. So it could have been both those things. Could have been both. Christy Lee says, you are a great person to break down behavior and human emotions. Thanks for that. Perhaps you are describing the collective as a whole, meaning not WHOLE. I don't like the terms narcissism and so on. I just find like everyone here is narcissistic to a greater or less extent. There's healthy narcissism and unhealthy narcissism, and a lot of are guilty of unhealthy narcissism. So to single out a criminal and say you're an unhealthy narcissist, to me is just, it's like saying, you know what, you breathe air, yeah, so does everyone else. You know what, so I don't know, I find it, to me, it doesn't fit into true crime. In our society right now, our society is narcissistic, so I just don't find it relevant. There are some people who are not more narcissistic than others, but I don't know how criminals necessarily stick out of that equation. Brian certainly doesn't seem to be someone who's particularly into social media, which a lot of narcissists are. Stephanie says so much more to people than a label. Stephanie will know because Stephanie knows me and also knows, the Watts case and a lot of other cases and has read some of my books and knows my attitude towards labels and particularly that label. Are you going to cover any other cases? Okay, so I think that addresses this whole thing of why are we covering the Gabby Petito case? Why is the Gabby Petito case so important? Why this and why that? To me, when you ask that question, why the Gabby Petito case? To me, it's like someone going into a grocery and they're about to pick up something from the grocery store, and someone comes up to them, a complete stranger comes up to them and says, why are you buying butter when there are so many other things you could buy in this grocery store? Or it could be anything else. Why are you buying yogurt when you could be buying anything else in this grocery store? And you could take any other thing, crisps, fruit juice, milk, meat, poultry, whatever. And whatever that item is, you could go up to them and say, why are you buying that? Why don't you buy something else? Well, because isn't it human nature? Isn't it human nature to have a certain want to a certain need? So I find that a little bit, I find it a little bit strange. The other side is to say, well, everybody is going to buy that margarine. That is a bit odd. Why is everyone going just to buy that? Everyone is going to the supermarket just to buy that margarine. Why? And I think the reason is because it resonates with people. This case resonates with people. A lot of people have wanted to escape the pandemic, just like Gabby and Brian. A lot of people have tried to escape the pandemic or try to deal with the pandemic and failed, and they've lost their businesses, they've lost their livelihood, they've lost their world, they've lost happiness. They've tried to have an adventure in the middle of this drudgery, of this loss of freedom. They've tried to be free and they've lost their freedom even more. They're trying to run away from it, but they can't. We can't. Kelly says, Nick, how did he spend $1,000 in 2 days? Doesn't mean he spent it. He could have drawn it, but a lot of that went to fuel. I think a lot of that went into fuel. Is there a substance abuse problem? I think substances are a potential topic. I definitely think that. I think if you have anxiety and you have insomnia and you are potentially hearing voices, then you are potentially also trying to deal with that. Again, it's not looking at whether there is that. It's quite hard to know. I think his parents would know. And I think it raises a really big question: is the Bullwinkle's encounter valid? It could be. If it is, it changes things a lot. And if my voice can stand it, I'll take you guys to the Bullwinkle's incident and we can talk about it. I want to say, if we talk about the Bullwinkle's encounter, that we're talking about it from the perspective of, I don't want to say this is a fact. I want to say, I don't know whether it's true or not. Let's see. It could be, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if the Bullwinkle's encounter is true, then it brings substances to the fore, and that changes things in an interesting way. Bizarre design, nomadic static. So let me ask you guys, how many of you guys know about the Bullwinkle's incident in West Yellowstone? So if you know about Bullwinkles, put up a 1. If you don't know about it, put a 2. Let's just have a look. Okay, so it's kind of a mixed bag. Okay, so I'm gonna take you guys to the Bullwinkle's incident, and then you'll see again exactly how reality shifts. The Bullwinkle's incident is a really good example of this question: what is reality? And I've got to admit, when I first heard about it, I didn't give it much. I didn't think it was credible. I didn't take it too seriously. And then Neem O'Sullivan says Bullwinkles equals antidepressant withdrawal. Certainly some kind of withdrawal. So just to be frank, when I studied the Bullwinkles encountered, I don't want to call it an incident because the Moab incident happened and we all know that. I'm kind of on the fence about Bullwinkles. I don't want to call it an incident. At this point, I want to call it an encounter because I don't know if it's definite that was Brian, right? Christy Lee says, a false persona delivered via media moment by moment with the whole world distracted. Look towards laws being passed and what's going, not politicized. I do think it is quite ironic that, the questions that are asked yesterday or in the previous video about why did it take so long to report Gabby, also is why did it take quite long to report Brian missing? And if you think about the background noise of distraction that we are dealing with right now, a lot of us who are here are distracted by this case, and things could be going on that we need to report, whether it's, talking about just like in your own civilian scenario, maybe you need to report a fault or there's something wrong with your electricity or something that needs to be done, but because you're distracted, you don't do it. Well, it's so common, it's a cliche. You're distracted, so you don't act immediately on certain things that maybe you could, right? So I just want to be like real that you pay attention to one thing, it's going to distract you from something else. That was the case with Gabby. Gabby was paying attention to this blog. She was paying attention to her social media. She was paying attention to what was going on, what people were saying. And maybe Brian felt unhappy about that. She's not paying attention to him. She's being pulled away from him. change the tires on the car. There we go. I mean, that is exactly what happened to me. My patrons know this. I was about to go on a trip myself in the first week of September, and I was so busy on social media, working, that within hours of going on the trip, I realized I had a flat tire. Why? Because I was distracted. And it's not as though I wasn't conscientious. I'd already packed the vehicle the night before. I'd fueled it, everything. But nevertheless, I was distracted just prior to going on the journey by what I was doing. It's real. That distraction is real. And that plays into criminals just as much, and vice versa. They're distracted, we can be as well. A lot of people paying attention to this case, you might be on a certain channel that just talks rubbish the whole time or deals with certain things, and you never actually get to the facts. You never actually find out very basic things because you're distracted. You said Bullwinkle, but what about Rocky? Not quite sure what that means. Alexandra says, so you don't believe that Bullwinkles happen? The answer to that is I initially was quite dismissive of it. Then I was totally on board, especially when I heard Hunter Manny speaking. When I heard him, I was like, wow, this he actually sounds on the level. And then I sort of moved away from that. So I've got to say I'm not sure. I feel it's quite important to have an opinion. The law is either guilty or not guilty. Something's either this way or that way. And so I think there's a channel that says the most, that they're the most unbiased channel. I think it is important to be neutral when you're gathering information. But I think when you've gathered the information, you've got to exercise your discernment on it. You've got to have an opinion, especially if you're a legal dude, especially if you're dealing with something that is either nefarious or not, good or not. And so in terms of the Bullwinkles, I think it's important to come to a decision on that. But unfortunately, I'm not sure. I've got to say that I'm not sure. And so over time, I'm sure that is going to, over time, as we gather more information, that will be more certain. And I guess one of the ways to find out whether it is credible is getting to know Hunter Manny, and also there were other people in the bar as well. Why didn't they come forward? Surely they saw him as well, right? Lula Bell says, I find the South African accent very charming. Not everyone does. Before I did lives, and it was a long time I did YouTube, before I did lives, when I did eventually do it, people said, I thought you were from India. So not everyone. HTY says voices. So that's something that appears to be true based on what I think Rose Davis said, that Brian would go through episodes of insomnia and anxiety and also hearing voices. So I think Rose is also someone that we actually need to hear from again. I'd love to have her on this channel. I'd love to do an interview with her, like Anya, so if you're listening. Rose witnessed a side to Brian that I think very few did because she was close to Gabby and she's not a parent. She's kind of a peer. And I think she was actually worried that Brian was going to come after her. That's how well she knew this other Brian, right? So that's also why we've not heard much from Rose, is nobody knows where Brian is, and including Rose. And Rose might be quite worried. So it's through Rose that we could get to know an aspect to Brian that's not very well known at this point. I don't have a reason not to believe Rose. I think Rose, at that time, she was trying to look out for her friend. So when you give your name and you go on to the mainstream media, if you say anything that's not true, it's going to be really obvious. So, I think we've got to bear in mind what she said as part of all of this. And I do think the hearing voices thing totally matches Fight Club. The whole Fight Club scenario is somebody who is in a total delusion. They're so caught up in this delusion, and I kind of get the feeling that Brian found that cool in a kind of a grungy way. He found that the depravity, the gratuitous violence, the dysfunction, I think he found it kind of compelling, but in a way that you want to be part of it. Yeah, and so Fight Club's actually about a guy who loses touch with reality in such a radical way that he's not in the real world anymore. In fact, he does become a split personality, right? And it's a guy it's a guy who becomes so insignificant and so invisible that he's got to generate this other persona that deals with the world, that's more assertive, more good-looking and strong. And I wonder whether that's not the Brian that has emerged right now. He's the other Brian, just like Tyler Durden is the other Jack, or whatever you want to call it. So Fight Club may turn out to be far more psychologically relevant than people realize. Bear in mind, he drew pictures from Fight Club. You have pictures of the book, I think, more than once. It's definitely part of the fabric. But Fight Club is also, their voices in Fight Club. There's imagined scenes. There's situations where Tyler Durden's kind of in another room, and also like the sounds of lovemaking. And it turns out that he's been doing it all along. It's not Tyler that's been having the affair with Marla, it's him. He's just imagined it to be somebody else in a way. What about Brian's supposed trip home to deal with a storage unit? Yeah, well, that's also a fact, also a factor. I think that sort of disconnection is with Gabby, and they're sort of moving slowly, and then he flies out of there, home and back. Is also a possible echo to his movements now, that he may also be thinking, wow, if only I could fly out of here. Is there a way you could do that? I don't think so. But you might think, okay, if I can't fly, maybe a boat or a train. So those are definitely possibilities. In terms of rumor control, the canoe footage, the whole thing of he posted to Instagram, that I believe has been disproved. I don't believe it anymore. I don't think that is true. But that's a good example of something that caught on, made sense, and it's an opportunistic person who took advantage of people's attention, said what people kind of wanted to hear, and it caught on. And some people aren't aware now that isn't true. It's been disproved. Timmy, do you guys know that Timmy's been sitting on my lap all this time? If you were wondering where Timmy was, he was like right there all this time. He said he couldn't use a normal bookmark in the book because it was so sacred. Yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point. And he took that book with him on the Appalachian Trail. And there's some people that do turn books into Bibles. They read them over and over again. I'm one of them. I've read, you're not going to believe it, I've read Centennial a couple of times. It's a really big book. And I really loved that book. But there's people that will read a book again and again and again, and it becomes a kind of a cult or kind of a religion. There's some people who are like that about Harry Potter. Amanda Knox was like that about Harry Potter. And I think Harry Potter in the Amanda Knox case is underestimated. The book that she was reading, underestimated. Suzanne Du Rietz, you do very good videos. Suzanne in Stockholm. Okay, thanks for that, Suzanne. Whenever Timmy starts licking my fingers, I feel like it's time for him to go. Ironically, He's almost like saying, "Oh, it's so lovely here," and I'm like, my fingers all wet. So, can I just do this before we get to the bullwinkles? We're talking about the laundry search strategy. Does it or should it involve boats? Does it or should it involve islands? Does it or should it involve camping grounds? Does it or should it involve the Appalachian Trail? And I think the answer is it does involve boats, it does involve islands, it does involve camping grounds, it could involve the Appalachian Trail. The question is, should it? Should it involve all of that? And I would say 2 weeks later, at least, more than 2 weeks later, they haven't found anything. So it's not as though they found sort of coals or a shoe or some kind of item of clothing, or there was a sighting somewhere, and that reinforces the fact that we should keep looking for Brian here or there. Dog, the bounty hunter, has been on the case for how long? Has been out there for how long? Has he found anything that is incontrovertible evidence of Brian out there camping or whatever? Doesn't look that way. Christy Lee, are you aware of the monarch butterfly and programming? I am aware of the butterfly, but I'm not going into the conspiracy theory stuff. Mods, just be careful of if there are people that are going to insist on that this is all some huge conspiracy. We don't really want that here. This is true crime rocket science, not true crime conspiracy. There are other channels for that. So I must be quite explicit about that. If you want to just keep insisting that this is some kind of dark demonic conspiracy, then you really should head to another channel or start your own channel. Okay, so we don't really want to talk about that kind of stuff here, and maybe you feel that's a conspiracy as well, but basically the channels that love that stuff, this isn't one of those. So yeah, so exactly what Kelly said. So just mods, if you that stuff keeps coming up, I don't really care if it's a super chat or not. I don't really have time for that kind of stuff. We want to talk about Brian, we want to talk about Gabby, we want to talk about where the evidence is leading, we want to talk about facts. And that's really as far as it goes. So this is being a little bit explicit about what I've been saying all along. Search for Brian by not searching for him. How do you do that? Well, you get the things like money. Or is money going out of, how can I put it? Is money going out of Wabasso Avenue to Brian? Is cash going out, or are there kind of digital transactions? I've got an idea that would be quite difficult to monitor because of certain privacy legislation, but that would definitely be, if Brian is supported, one of the ways he would need to be supported is financially. So that would be quite an important aspect. Obviously, if you can't see that now, that would probably come to light later on when you would seize records, right? So that's definitely an aspect. Of course, there are lots of different ways that money can be transferred besides from bank to bank. There's definitely all sorts of alternatives there. The other thing is a digital trail, things like texts, WhatsApps, whatever. We know in the Barry Morphew case, Suzanne secretly sent messages on LinkedIn. No one would have expected that. So there's possibly some kind of surreptitious contact. It could be to an email. Who knows? You could use all sorts of digital masking, where it's all kind of hidden behind I don't really want to go into that, but the point is that the digital trail could link you to Brian. And also, if Brian is doing some kind of social media activity, that would expose him the best way and the soonest way. Is Brian tempted to take a selfie? That could happen in the fullness of time, and then more and more. There does feel like there may be a sense of taunting going on, because Brian does seem to think that he's quite clever, and he has so far fooled the Moab cops. I don't know if you could say he's fooled his parents, but he's fooled the FBI, and he's fooled a lot of people for quite a while. So you may be feeling like whether he is or not, he may feel like he's taunting us. He may be tempted to taunt us as well, taunt law enforcement, taunt social media. Dan Kubero, first time I've commented live. This is fun, and please review my awesome questions. Thanks, man. I hope your questions are in the comments. If they are, I will check them out. Otherwise, I'm not sure where they are. Glenda, to get Timmy a treat. Thanks, Glenda. Timmy's back to sleep, looks like. I do think a family member. So again, how do you search for Brian? You search for him by not searching for him. And how do you not search for him? Well, a family member will lead you to him. A family member may lead you directly to him, or a family member may communicate with him. Bear in mind, a lot of what is surrounding this is this idea that a family member knows something and they're not saying, that the parents only reported him missing something like 3 or 4 days after he went missing. So this thing of him being supported is very real. And so that's actually very useful, is look to them to connect you to Brian. Don't go and look for Brian, follow them. Follow their communications, follow their transactions, follow that aspect. And it could also be a family member communicating with another family member that we don't know of yet. That could also be happening. So intertextually, this reminds me a little bit of the Scott Peterson case, this for Lacey Peterson. Now, you had this incredible evidence that Scott Peterson went to the marina. You had that was like absolutely clear, but then you didn't know what happened after that, right? So, in a way, I think you have a similar situation here, where you have the car that is parked where it is, but then what? And the sort of trailer's gone cold since then. Now, if you take Scott Peterson, they never found Lacey. Like, all the searching never found Lacey. What found Lacey was the weather. There was a big rainstorm. I've written 3 books on the Scott Peterson case. There was a big storm, and the water flushed into the San Francisco Bay, and that dislodged the anchors that Lacey had been anchored to for something like 3 months. And that changed everything. And that's how they found Lacey, because she washed up. The weather changed the game. They didn't find Lacey. And you need to think about that in that scenario in this case as well, that obviously I don't think this is a case that Brian's not alive or is at the bottom of the sea somewhere. But the thing that can change something can be completely not what you expect. Yeah, she surfaced. And Brian may surface somewhere. It may not be that you find Brian, but that Brian surfaces somewhere, where he chooses to go to a store and buy something and he's seen, where he chooses to, maybe he has a vehicle that we not aware of. Maybe he is camping somewhere and he comes out of the wilderness to buy matches or a phone or something like that. Michael says, what is the family's motivation to help him? Love, relationship. Maybe whatever he told them they thought was true. Maybe they got unwittingly caught up into something and now they've got to continue. Maybe the story in the beginning was that Gabby was very unreasonable and Gabby wandered off. She sort of went into the wild like Chris McCandless, and then what was he supposed to do? He looked for her for 3 days, couldn't find her, and then he came home. The hitchhiking thing would sort of support that he was far from the van, moving around trying to find her, and then when he couldn't find her after 3 days, he came home. Or that she said, I'm going to Yellowstone, and he didn't want to go. But then other things happened, and the parents have got to choose, do we believe Brian or do we believe law enforcement? Do we protect our son or what do we do? Betty Blue says Brian will become a cold case. I think it's far too soon to say that, but look at the Summer Wells case. I don't think the Summer Wells case will either, but it's quite quickly gone cold. Rukoko says, I believe dog. Okay. Ashley says, maybe he'll find the courage to turn his self in after a while. Maybe. I wouldn't count on it. Erica says, if there's one huntsman out there, there are others. That's for sure. There've actually been huntsman nests in my garden, so they really like my garden. Okay, so last thing to say on the Laundrie search strategy. Is Brian alive or isn't he? I think he's alive. Do we search for him indoors or outdoors? I think we should be searching for him indoors, which is much, much harder. But how you search for someone is indoors is you look at the money trail, you look at the digital trail, you look at communication. And also bear in mind the context that we're in. The pandemic is an important context that is changing behavior, that is making people more amenable to staying in one place because that's what we've been doing. That's been making people more comfortable with being indoors, watching TV all day, watching YouTube all day, reading, doing all the things that people have done during the pandemic. I'm a writer. I've written a lot of books. A lot of people have read my books during the pandemic and watched my videos during the pandemic. That is what people have been doing during the pandemic. If you're a fugitive, still during the pandemic, but the pandemic is a backdrop to all of this. How hard is it to go back to the behavior of the past? And the past is the best predictor of the future. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Masks are a huge asset to a fugitive where everybody is wearing masks. If you want to be in plain sight, go somewhere where there's a lot of mask wearing, so that if you wear a mask, it's not going to be weird. Okay, so at last I can move on to the next page. This whole idea of paying attention to another case. Why are you paying attention to the Gabby Petito case? Pay attention to another one. You could apply the same thing to someone who's about to get married, someone who's like in the wedding ceremony, and you run up to them and say, why are you marrying this person? There are 7 billion other people out there. Why can't you just marry someone else? Why do you think that someone, I do think the issue for a lot of people isn't that you are paying attention to this case. It is the sum of it all and the resources spent on it, and saying, why can't we get those resources? Why can't those resources go to what I want them to go to, that and that and the other thing? That's a bit of a different conversation, but I've also got to say, as a true crime creator, as a true crime writer, the cases I tend to avoid by default, and I'll give you an idea. So if you said, can you please stop paying attention to the Gabby Petito case? Here's a case that has just happened and it's this and that and the next thing. So following, I don't really pay attention at all to cases involving drug addicts because it's so obvious what has happened there. You don't need to think about motive. You don't need to think about very much at all because the outcome is so predictable, right? And I think I've kind of made an exception with the Summer Wells case. I think that is front and center the main crux of the Summer Wells case. And you could see it from a mile away. What makes the Summer Wells case quite interesting is the outcome is still not completely clear, and the other factors as well. But so if you say, "Can't you please pay attention to a drug addict?" Why? It's absolutely obvious what has happened. And also, if you took your attention away from the Gabby Petito case, it would just be some other case, and then just some other case. The Gabby Petito case is an important symbol right now for America. And I think as soon as you start saying something about the race or this or that, that's also part of the conversation that is going on as part of the zeitgeist now. But what is important to recognize is the Gabby Petito case is symbolic for a lot of people of what is going on in their own lives. And that's important to recognize. You may not like certain people, you may not agree with certain people, but it is important to recognize how people form a society and that things are important to people at a certain point in time. And if you appreciate that the Gabby Petito case resonates with people right now, then I think you can find it, you get a sense of, I can understand the heart of America right now. They've been talking about Gabby as America's daughter. What has happened to America's daughter? She's been lost. She's been missing. Turned up that she's died. She's looked like something may have happened. The person closest to her has done something to her. Now that person's run away. And now what is reality? Who can we trust? Can we even trust his parents? It's this idea of the American youth trying to find their way and getting lost, getting into trouble. Who's going to save them? Who's going to stop them? Who's going to catch up to them? All of that is something that, in a way, resonates with all of us. When I think of this case, I think about the escapism aspect, this doomed escape, but also I think about me at that age. I was in a relationship and I went abroad and it was sort of catastrophic. It was really painful. It was really traumatic. It also had its highs and lows. It also had not telling your parents what was going on. It also had reaching out for money. It also had high adventure and thrills. It didn't really have social media because it didn't exist at the time, but it did have a lot of photos. It did have a lot of self-portraits. It did have a lot of trying to become an individual and have an adventure and have this life that is pulled out of the doldrums of working a job. It had all of those aspects. Part of Gabby's story is this attempt to reclaim life. Part of Gabby's story is this attempt to reclaim the vigor and vitality and joy of living and the spirit of adventure and the feeling of being alive. And all of us are feeling that right now. Whether you into the Petito case or not, all of us are feeling the sense of, because of this pandemic that has been this thing overshadowing us and stealing away our summers and our holidays and all of these things. We want our lives back. And the Petito case is about somebody trying to do that and then it ending horribly. And some people during the pandemic who did try to do that, their lives ended horribly. Our dreams, yeah. So I think a lot of people judging it and thinking, why Gabby, whatever, you're missing the point. All these people are, in a weird way, they're seeing it's a symbolic thing, and in a weird way, they're working through their own Anxiety. HTY, how do you say that? Hitti. Is the Murdoch case on your radar? For some reason, it's not. I know it's quite high profile. For some reason, not quite on my radar. Someone asked, am I writing a book on the Petito case? I've got a lot to say about it. I love the tapestry surrounding it. There's so much symbolism and meaning, and there's so much that you can take that is going to heal certain wounds in people and address certain things. But having said that, I think the pandemic's also had an impact on me. I want to escape as well. I want to not be writing books, and writing a book is like being in lockdown. And over the past decade, I've written about 100 books, and I felt like I went from voluntary lockdown to a kind of involuntary lockdown. I was about to travel to the States when the pandemic happened. So I don't really want to be writing books right now. Thanks, Maggie. Esmeralda, if you knew Brian Laundrie's watching right now, what would you say to him? Watching from Brazil. Thanks, Esmeralda. What would I say? I'd say, you know how this is going to end. So, if you hand yourself in now, I know you don't want to hand yourself in. That's the most terrifying thing. But if you hand yourself in, that does give you a bit of credit. You win a bit of credit for that. The longer the time goes on, you might think you're getting stronger in a spiritual sense, but your position weakens. There'll be more and more and more evidence against you, and this is only going to grow. So you should consider throwing in the towel. Like you threw in the towel on the summer epic, you should throw your towel in. And, you've made your point in a big way. You can't make it any bigger than you've already made it. If you think that you can live your whole life on the run, somebody tried that. The world's most wanted man tried that, got away with it for a couple of years. Do you see yourself doing that? Do you see that as freedom? And do you want to put your family through this as well? So that would be my message to him. Think of your parents. It's not just you. And if you care about society, you've made your point. You've made your point. I do think there's another aspect to this, which is if he does turn himself in, the next is a trial with some very serious charges. That's the other aspect. It's not just turning yourself in and then, okay, go home and live happily ever after. We are living in a careworn world filled with troubles and difficulties. The Petito case reflects that, and we can't escape that. We're also trying to escape. We're also trying to escape the pandemic. Some people still don't even believe the pandemic is true or vaccines are true. Those people are fugitives from truth. And I'm sorry if some of you here are some people believing that, but that is a fact. And so you say, no, well, I don't believe in scientists. Okay, well, that's your choice then. I believe whatever I choose to believe. Well, you're a fugitive. You're running away from the truth. You're trying to escape. Probably the reason is because of your anxiety. Because the truth, if you take the other side of it, well, that is pretty scary. You get a sense of control by believing in a conspiracy. And there's certain levels of anxiety soothing that you get by believing certain things. So bear in mind you're choosing to believe certain things. I'm sure I've just poked the dragon by saying that. So let's go to rumors. Does Brian hear voices? I would love to hear what his parents say about that, suffer from insomnia. But you can imagine someone suffering from insomnia, and insomnia and voices would go together, by the way. Someone suffering from insomnia in a van life situation could be very grouchy, very moody, and it could get, you can imagine how tensions can escalate. And I've been in that situation. I did a circuit of Australia. I think it is 2010. I did a circumnavigated Australia, and sleep deprivation was chronic during that trip. And I did done things like I lost my credit card, lost my driver's license. Um, Corporal D, big spider. Okay, thanks for that. So, sleep deprivation can make things a million times worse. It can make you cranky. It can make you imagine things. It can make you paranoid. And I'm talking about someone who doesn't have mental illness, who simply is too overstimulated, and artists often are. As a writer, I'm often so overstimulated I can't sleep even when I'm exhausted. So I also suffer from, I'm not sure if it's insomnia or sleep apnea or just basic being overstimulated. What that can lead to, if you're not careful, is that you imagine things that aren't so. You lose perspective on reality. You lose perspective on a relationship. And I wonder whether that didn't happen on this trip. And that is what makes the Bullwinkle's incident encounter so tempting to accept, is it ticks a lot of the boxes that seem to be in play. But just because it fits that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And why it doesn't seem to be true is the mainstream media aren't putting it into their timelines. Maybe because the law enforcement haven't accepted it. I don't know. The law enforcement might accept it later on. To me, it feels like it doesn't quite fit their movements, but it's close enough that it could fit. But aren't you making a case of special pleading? That is why I'm a little bit hesitant to accept it, because it doesn't quite fit where they were in terms of their movements. It's not impossible to get where they were, but it's a fair distance to go. On the other hand, if they were arguing, you can imagine Brian leaving in a vehicle and going somewhere and go, but to look at the parks that were nearby, and Yellowstone is nearby. Susan says, I think it was a false spotting. Could well be. Zoot Zinboot Z says footage would help Bullwinkles. Absolutely. The other problem I have with Bullwinkles is there's only one person saying this, whereas at Mary Piglet's there's a couple and there's the restaurant staff. Where's the restaurant staff at Bullwinkles? Why is there just one individual? Feels a bit like crying wolf. Okay, so I'm going to deal with the Bullwinkles incident right now, if I can find it. Someone's just emailed me to say, with insomnia, nothing is real. And that's a major theme in Fight Club, by the way, where nothing is real, nothing matters. If you've seen Fight Club, you can really appreciate that. See, I've got so many emails with information that I can't find the information I sent about the live. I sent myself about it. Okay, I think I'm going to have to go somewhere else to get it. Just give me a second. I've just got to source something here. Bullwinkles. It's a script that I wrote that I just want to refer to because it's got facts and information. What I will do is I will put up a link to Hunter Manny's video so you guys can watch it as well and get a sense of him, whether you believe him. That's what it really boils down to. Should we believe him? Here it is. Okay. Is there a way I can do this? Can I just ask my mods to provide the YouTube link to the Bullwinkle Singh, and it's from this post on Patreon. So I don't know if Stephanie or Sharon, if you can just get the link there. I don't want to go completely out. Okay, and just get the link so that you guys can watch this. So this is the narrative, okay? It sounds like this guy, Hunter Lee Mannies, spoke to the FBI. So the FBI actually spoke to him. Whether they believe him or not is a different story, but the fact that they spoke to him shows that the FBI, at least hypothetically, theoretically, found what he said credible enough to talk to him. So they didn't just dismiss him. It sounds like he spoke to the FBI. If true, then the encounter rises a few notches in terms of being credible. Bear in mind, he says he spoke to the FBI. Is it true? I don't know. The FBI haven't said much about it. The FBI haven't asked folks from Bullwinkle's bar to, I'm not sure if they did ask for CCTV footage, have they? But if it's true that he did, then the encounter rises a few notches in terms of being credible. His narrative also includes how he traveled from Jackson Hole, the airport actually, through the Tetons before emerging at the west gate of Yellowstone. It's very likely Brian and Gabby may have undertaken a similar journey. So speaking generally, Mannies rings true. Now, this is where it gets interesting, especially if we accept Mannies' version as credible. Now, I want to give a bit of a disclaimer here and say, I don't know. I'm in the middle ground, which I rarely am. I don't know whether I accept it or not. I've felt in the past that I don't accept it, and I felt this does make sense. At present, I've got to say I'm not sure. I'm neutral. So it's up to you guys to see what you think. In time, we will have more certainty about it. So number one, if we accept this as credible, substance abuse emerges as an issue. Now let's be clear about this. There doesn't appear to be substance abuse elsewhere. And that's where you've got to be careful to say, is this new information or is this not reliable information, right? Is this new, something that we should know but don't know, or is it new but it's actually unreliable? And there's no evidence that Brian was abusing any kind of substances. We do have a sense that he was anxious, and if Rose is correct, that he was suffering from insomnia. And often people in that situation do drink or take something to deal with that. And that has come up. It has come up, I think, in the Moab incident where they said, we are both anxious. And I'm not sure who said it. I think it was Brian said, but we're not taking any medication. The fact that he even brought that up, that we're not taking medication, brings the question into relevancy. Is medication a factor? Are medications, drugs, chemicals a factor? It may be a factor in a barefoot, naked and afraid sense, like eating magic mushrooms, maybe a factor in that sense. Often folks who use recreational substances use several. So if Brian was drinking, was he doing something else? So it's potentially opening a can of worms. Is this a factor? I certainly don't want to say that he's an alcoholic or anything, just that this becomes more relevant potentially. So it's still difficult to be certain about this, but it's a cliche when it comes to campers, is that they often drink. campers. My father is a good example of a guy who goes into Botswana. Before the pandemic, he would go once a year. This is big Africa. This is where there are lions running around your campsite, even buffaloes, elephants, all these kinds of things. But you spend a lot of time staring into a fire, and what do you do when you're doing that? Well, you drink vodka or whatever. You'd have a beer kind of thing. Did they do that? I don't know. But a lot of campers do that. What if you're a camper and you can't sleep? I would do that. So it is kind of a cliche with that. The question is, was it a cliche in this case? Do students, and I'm not saying Brian was a student, but he's the same age as a student, do students tend to drink? So that is how it potentially becomes relevant. According to the Bullwinkle's encounter, this guy, Hunter Manny, saw a guy who he thought was Brian or looked like Brian. He looked miserable. He was at the bar. This is in West Yellowstone. And this guy appeared to be drinking or nursing a beer, and he was there for some time. The timeline here is how you start to check whether it's true or not. I think he thought that this happened at 10 o'clock that night, whereas someone else said quite convincingly they thought they saw Brian's van driving very slowly that same day, the 26th, at 8 o'clock that evening. Now, one or both of them may have the times wrong, but that does create a certain problem that you can't be in two places at once. But it does bring into sharp focus this idea of the dynamics. If Brian and Gabby had just argued and had been arguing all along, is that why he was alone at the bar for several hours? That also brings up another question is this the kind of thing that Brian would do? If Brian had argued, would he go to a bar? One possible way to address this is to go back to the Moab incident and ask the hotel, what did Brian do in his hotel room? Did he go out to a bar there in Moab? Did he drink from the what do they call it, the hotel bar, or do they call it that sort of mini bar if it's in your hotel room? I don't know if that would have that. But, is there any element of that during the Moab incident that could give you some support potentially for this or not? Or was he on social media? What was he doing that night in the hotel in Moab? Because they were fighting. So that could give you an idea of what could have happened on the night of the 26th. So the 26th is a very important date that there's a lot of confusion about and quite a lot of uncertainty. It's an important day. It's the day before a very important day, the most important day, the 27th, the day that I think Gabby lost her life. It's interesting that the witness was asked about a phone, if Brian had a phone with him, because one can imagine him sitting alone in the bar, systematically going through Gabby's social media and trying to police it. You get the idea that is actually what they argued about in terms of the Moab incident. If you go to the witness said they were arguing about her phone. He was trying to take her phone. And so Brian, you get the sense that Brian was trying to control Gabby's narrative in terms of her narrative on social media. He was trying to control what she was saying, what she was doing, because probably he felt that was a threat to their relationship, and I really think it was a threat. So I think it's quite possible that Brian's doing that right now. He's trying to monitor his narrative, what is being said about him, because it's so important to him. Do you think he's doing that from a campsite or from a Paper Avenue type abandoned house? Sorry, abandoned house. By the way, this is water, not alcohol. So Brian may have been in the bar still stewing about something in terms of the Bill Winkles thing. It could have been that Gabby said, I need to work on my blog. We've just taken some great photos of the Grand Tetons, and I want to work on what I'm going to put on Instagram, and I want to work on the blog. And bear in mind, if you go to their website right now, it's not ready. You've got to put in a password, and so they were building it. And I think Gabby was more invested in it than he was. She may have needed his help to set it up. And maybe she was like, I want to work on that, today, you go and do something else. And then he drove to Yellowstone. That could well have happened. And that does hold hands with what another rumor has, that they saw Gabby at a campsite, Signal Mountain campsite, I think. Sorry, Signal Mountain hotel or motel, and saw Gabby working on a computer, but the problem with a lot of this is it's exactly what you want to hear. And so you don't know whether someone is, again, one would say, well, if that is a verified sighting, where's the hotel booking? Where's the hotel CCV? Where's the hotel staff? Where's anyone else saying the same thing? And that tends to make me wonder, is it another opportunist that's trying to get traction out of this case? But a lot of people are coming to the Gabby Petito case with their own agendas. They don't want to know what's going on necessarily. They want to get the pound of flesh out of it, kind of thing. I'm talking about channels that aren't true crime channels, that are less preoccupied with the truth than imposing something into it to get something out of it. Number 3, the emotionally charged August 26th sets the stage for a murderous August 27th. So it makes complete sense that a Bullwinkles type encounter would be on the cards. So it's exactly what you expect, but the question is it true? So if it is true, Brian may have had misgivings about the events that day. If you listen to the video, you'll hear what they were. A Thursday, so he goes into Friday still in downer mode. And I think that's true regardless, whether the Bullwinkles encounter happened or not. I think there was some unpleasant encounter, some unpleasant argument, whether it was with Gabby or someone else. I'm sure it was with Gabby. I'm sure it wasn't like they just argued that day. I think there was a lot going on before that. Things weren't getting better. But I think obviously the Mary Piglets incident is of singular importance. We know of it. And we know Brian went back in there 4 times. That had to have been a horrible kind of conflagration, a nasty drama that would have given Gabby a sense of being prickled with embarrassment and feeling humiliated and feeling uncomfortable with this guy that she was with. And him as well. I think he was still seething. I think the steam was still coming out of his ears when they left and when they got in the vehicle. And he probably, if you think about the drive during the Moab incident, you think about the way he was driving and what was happening in the vehicle. This is with the cops behind him. Think about what was happening in the vehicle after the Mary Piglets. And the Moab incident is still fresh in his mind, where he's thinking, you got me into the situation because you were emotional or something. I'm sure he blamed her, scapegoated her for that. So if he was slighted there at Bullwinkles again, well, then he was really primed to explode. And within the busy Friday flock, bear in mind, everything that happened at Mary Piglets happened on a Friday. It's often where people are away for the weekend, away from their jobs or whatever. And so you can imagine it being particularly busy then. And so the restaurant was packed, the restaurant was full. And it's in a situation like that that a customer can feel slighted. You took so long to bring my food, you overcharged me, you got this wrong, you bought the wrong sauce, I didn't want salt on that or whatever. And because they distracted and there's so much going on, they make mistakes, and Brian takes it personally. Brian feels slighted again, right? So if he developed a hatred for the unnatural world, And for certain elements of society, well, he was confronting both on consecutive days, if the Bullwinkle's incident is correct. Bear in mind, he goes into these parks and he appreciates that, and then he bumps into people that he doesn't appreciate. And then there's Gabby, who's trying to kind of monetize everything on social media. They are thousands of miles from Wabasso Avenue, and there's no going back to his bedroom to sulk if that's on the cards. There's no Roberta to give him a pat on the back. There's nowhere to hide. When he's with Gabby in this van, in this small space, there's nowhere to hide. And someone put him on van life, just saying, who wants to travel and see the world and see these mountains and see this amazing scenery? And this whole crowd of people put up their hands. And then the next thing is, who wants to spend days on end in this cramped space that is so many feet, without a bath or a shower, and and no one puts up their hands. That's the reality. And in a way, there's nowhere to hide when you start being in a bad mood, when you have a bad night, you haven't slept enough. So I think he was exposed in his moodiness and found wanting. And it's not just him being moody. Gabby was probably also moody, but you can be moody and handle it. Someone can handle someone else's moodiness, or it can make them even more moody. It can make them irritated, angry, impatient, and triggered. So one person can be moody and it's fine. But maybe you can't handle it when you are sleep deprived and uncomfortable and uncertain and insecure and worrying about all these other things. So because Gabby was with him and Gabby was there to hold him accountable to the service and patrons, and to her as an increasingly failing prospect in the future husband sense, there was nowhere to hide. He couldn't hide from the social media. He couldn't hide from what Gabby was starting to realize about him. He was losing control. So it may have been a case of us against the world of Brian, for Brian. It's just us, and we don't need other people. But now it's becoming Brian against the world. It's just me against the world, like the character in Fight Club. And when Gabby played her cards against him, he cashed out his chips in terms of the Mary Piglets. And I think part of him cashing out his chips was taking hers, possibly. And if he took her money, did he also take her life? I think somehow in all of this, Brian imagines himself as a victim of life, a victim of the world, a victim of the way society is configured, even a victim of Gabby in the social death sense, in the social media sense, in the sense of him being a social media failure, obviously not now. If she was killed, was that getting revenge on everyone through her? Because maybe that's who she'd come to represent via her attachments to social media. So that's anyway a working theory. What do you guys think of that? And that's all based on, to some extent, if the Bullwinkles thing did happen, as I say, even if it didn't happen, it may be an analogy for what did happen. Is substances or are substances relevant here? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Maybe the substance that we need to pay attention to is social media as a drug, as something that you need your supply of, and maybe he wasn't getting it. Okay, we had 2 hours, 20 minutes. I haven't gotten through everything I wanted to get through, so I'm actually not going to take it too much further than this. I wanted to deal with the timeline. I'm just feeling quite tired. I haven't really eaten, and I'm very tempted to eat this apple in front of you guys. I'm not going to do that. I wanted to talk about the computer game that he was playing and that he was interested in. I'm not going to deal with that right now. I suppose I could finish off with Ernest Becker. I'll maybe do the timeline. It's a very detailed timeline. I'll maybe do that at a different point. Someone says, eat the apple. let's just have a look at some of your comments. I'm going to take a bite from this apple. Patricia Burns says, have you seen the Big Seven? I think you mean the Big Five. I have. What he says makes me want an apple now. Okay. Stephanie, thank you for staying on long enough for me to join in after work. Thanks, Stephanie. Moniz Smoke, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate your insight. Thanks a lot. Eat quieter. Okay. I don't know if you guys heard Timmy snoring. Sometimes people think that's something to do with me, but it's the dog. Do you know that Timmy's still here? So Timmy's been lying on me for almost 2.5 hours. I'm feeling a bit sweaty from that as well. Timmy, they want to say hello. Timmy, do you want some apple? Do you want some apple? Huh? No, he doesn't want some apple. Something that's quite interesting with schnauz is that apparently if you're about to give them something to eat, they lick their lips just before you do that. I don't know, do all dogs do that? Ditching the Grind says, apples are our favorite snack. Okay. Susan says, I loved the blue of the ocean on the beach video. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, it's something about the colors of summer that bring you alive, and winter is just so dull and drab. It also helps to settle you down, But right here, my garden right now is just full of color. I went to buy a lot of flowers and all sorts of plants, bougainvillea, and just like that, it's a beautiful environment. I've really neatened it up. I might show some of you guys what it looks like, probably on Patreon, just because I don't want. Kelly says, hit the like button. I wanted to say, let's see if we can hit 1,000 likes, but I see we're at 1,500. Let's see if we can get to 2,000 likes. Someone says, just mute and get stuck in. Can I have another bite? I'm almost through it. Someone says, smile and laugh more, it'll do you good. I don't know if that's appropriate for true crime, smiling and laughing, and it's all a big joke. Have a sense of humor, sure. Moments of levity, but I think true crime deserves a bit of gravitas. You need to be a bit lighthearted here and there, but you deserve that apple. Thanks, Songbird. Timmy, what are you doing? Hey? Looks like he's trying to lick his toes or something. Are we going to get to 2,000 likes, do you think? I tried twice for a super chat, but they won't go through. What is going on? No idea. I've never heard of that. I like your seriousness. Okay. Sweet Timmy. He wants some apple. Okay, let's see if Timmy wants some apple. I doubt it, though. I know there's he'll eat certain vegetables, but he won't. Let's see if he'll eat this. I'm trying to do it on camera, though. Okay, Timmy, let's try. There we go. There we go. There we go. Do you think he likes that? That struggled to go down, I think. My dog would eat apples, okay. You have a soothing voice, Nick. Well, there are some people who have a horrible, irritating nasal voice, so it depends, all relative. Dogs are the best. Peel the apple, okay. My dogs love apples, okay. Timmy is a 1.5 years old, so still quite a young. He would rather a sausage, I'm sure. Will he chew gum? No, definitely not. Thanks, Sharon. Okay, so in order to, thanks for that, Stephanie. Well, that is quite a milestone. I'm struggling to keep track. In order to read this last section from Beck, I'm going to have to put Timmy on the ground so I can open the book and read it. So sorry, Timmy. He's trying to lick his toes anyway, so this will help him. So I'm really deal with this a lot. It's this book, Angel in Armor, a post-Freudian perspective on the nature of man. Author of the Pulitzer Prize winning book, The Denial of Death. Mr. Becker possesses, in addition to his rare knowledge and concerns relevant to a young activist generation, a straightforward prose style and a mind as comfortable with philosophy and literature as it is with psychology. The New York Times Book Review. An eloquent plea for a merger of art, science, and society as the most meaningful basis for genuinely cumulative knowledge about ourselves. Book news. I just find Ernest Becker incredibly incisive when it comes to figuring out people and what they're doing through certain areas: self-esteem, the ego, anxiety, anal sadistic character, all that kind of thing. So I'm just going to touch here on what he talks about self-esteem. Really not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is page 12 and 13. I'm not going to actually say what the chapter title is, but the section under the chapter title, and this is from the book Angel in Armor, is Nature of Self-Esteem. I'm just going to read this quickly. He says, the next important idea is the fundamental place that self-esteem has in human action. We must understand how important it is for the individual to feel himself a locus of value, to have a warm sense of his own worth. We know that he earns this from childhood on as he wins approval from his parents for his acts. This is really important, and this is what I've highlighted in blue there. But the thing we really have to understand about self-esteem is that it cannot be achieved in a passive way only. And that is so important, is someone that is potentially in Brian's position. So someone who is potentially got self-esteem issues. A lot of young people, a lot of people who are even older can have it as well. Someone who is feeling insecure, someone who's feeling inadequate. Spend enough time on social media and you are very likely to feel insecure about something, feel inadequate about something, feel upset about something. But in terms of the young person or someone who becomes a criminal, you can't achieve proper self-esteem passively. So you can't actually, Mamachi, crazy case with twists and turns, thanks for that. You can't achieve genuine, authentic self-esteem passively. You can't achieve self-esteem reading a book. You can't achieve self-esteem looking at your phone or sending emails, right? You achieve it by doing something, by going out into the world, by meeting people and have people meet you and get to know you, the real you. You get it by moving, by exercising, by seeing how the world works, by real experiences. You can't get self-esteem passively. You've got to step into the world. You've got to learn something new. You've got to take a risk. And so in a weird way, I wonder whether Brian right now is gaining self-esteem through this, because I don't know whether he is stepping into the world through this phase he's in now, but certainly is not in a comfort zone, right? He's definitely not in a comfort zone, and he's probably learned 1,000 times more about himself and about life in the last week or so, also in the last month, including in the summer epic when he was with Gabby, traveling through these parks, meeting people, having experiences. I think first his self-esteem dropped precipitously, and I think to some extent it's being rebuilt. As long as Brian outfoxes the FBI and stays ahead of the search for him, he's proving something, if anything, just to himself. That is not as dumb as people think, that is not as pathetic or whatever you want to say, that is actually whatever, fill in the blank. Lisa Stokes says, does self-esteem come at other people's expense? Not genuine self-esteem. So let's go back to this. So he says, the thing we have to understand about self-esteem is that it cannot be achieved in a passive way only. The organism is basically an active creature and can best warm about itself as it senses the pleasures of exercising its executive powers. Now, bear in mind, whenever you make a decision that is attached to self-esteem, whenever you make a decision to do something, you are in a way building your self-esteem, because when you make a decision, you act. And often when you don't make a decision, it's because of low self-esteem. I'm talking about procrastinating, laziness, being stuck, being depressed, being passive. It's because of low self-esteem. And so they can work hand in hand. But even if you don't feel ready to, take an action, go to gym, exercise, do something that's going to build up your self-esteem. I think a lot of people who are depressed are waiting for their self-esteem to rise almost by itself, passively, and then that's going to get them to take some kind of action. But you can also taste the apple before you eat it, kind of thing. Get the nourishment. Anyway, so he goes on to say, quote, we know that our highest satisfaction can only derive from solid achievement, from testing ourselves against the world and proving our powers to it. Now, isn't that exactly what Brian's doing? In his own way, and obviously within a true crime setting, a true crime scenario, Brian is testing himself against the world. He's testing himself against a search strategy, against various individuals, against the pursuit of the law, against justice in a way, against reality. But he is testing himself against the world right now. And so far he's ahead. At any moment that could end. At any moment they could say, Brian Laundrie arrested, Brian Laundrie found, Brian Laundrie caught. But I think a lot of us are surprised that it's gone on this long. His ability to escape and elude and avoid capture. I'm doing, therefore I am. So does he want to revert to this passive state? Does he want to be caught and incarcerated? Does he want to not be free? He's been in this pandemic situation. Does he want to be in a worse prison than that? Does he want to be in a prison within a pandemic? He goes on to say, quote, this has been known for a very long time, but in today's world, almost everything works to make people passive. Think about that. Think about social media and the media and the movies and everything else. In today's world, almost everything works to make people passive. Think about the cars we drive, the news we get, the phones we get. Where we would originally visit people, we now Skype with them. Where, once upon a time, someone like me would go on a book tour and speak to a hall full of people. Now you are separated, disconnected. It's sort of, it's passive in a way. You there, I'm here. We're not in the room together. You don't get a full sense of who a person is or who people are. William Goldfarb has aptly rephrased Descartes' philosophical dictum for our time. I am doing, therefore I am. It is the only way that makes sense to an active organism. I've done that, therefore I am. So you can imagine this person who has become a nothing, or feels like he's become a nothing, or feels invalidated in the context of Gabby's social media, and in terms of the social media experiment, now comes into being by killing off his social death, by taking an active role rather than a passive role, by gaining traction in the area of activity and action, right? And movement and so on. And I'm not sure if I'm going to take it much further than page 13, but to finish off, he says, quote, "The point we have to remember then is that self-esteem is inseparable from one's acts and one's power to act." Now, if you were the FBI or law enforcement or a prosecutor or an investigator, you might think, well, these are the rule books that we use. And you might think, what on earth does a cultural anthropologist, a guy talking about these seemingly cerebral aspects, what does it have to do with the criminal mind at all? And the answer is everything. You're not just getting to know the nature of the criminal mind, you're getting to know the nature of man. And we think we understand everything. We think we're very clever in the 21st century. We think we know everything. But you know what? We don't even know ourselves. We don't even know ourselves. And we think with all this information, we know so much. But if you don't know yourself, your chance of knowing, predicting, kind of getting a handle on, in this case, Brian Laundrie, is not very good if you don't even have a handle on reality, let alone your own reality. So if self-esteem is inseparable from one's acts, then think about how self-esteem is informing every action that Brian took all along in the story. Self-esteem is informing everything that happened at every point. During the Moab incident, during the events at the Spread Creek camp, at the Merry Piglets, the whole engagement thing is a self-esteem scenario, right? This fugitive thing is about something to do with his self-esteem, right? That applies to Gabby. Gabby chose to go on the summer epic because something was wrong with how things were going. She wasn't happy in her job. She wasn't happy with where things were. Part of it has got to do with the pandemic. She wanted a better life. She wanted to follow her bliss. And jealousy is a major theme in the story. Well, I'm going way beyond what I want to talk about. But jealousy is a major theme in the story. Her mother said that everyone's feeling very jealous and envious of their life on the road. I think that was kind of the point. That was kind of the point, is to take that and put it onto social media. And I'm following that because I'm jealous. A lot of people follow celebrities and so on social media as a kind of worship, as a kind of hero worship, as a kind of envy. And that's the currency of what's taking place. Through that, there's escapism, but it's based on, wow, I wish I had that. Wow, I wish I was so beautiful. I wish I had that experience of life. I wish that was mine, right? And that is how our self-esteem is part of it. But what does it do? It makes us passive. It makes us passive passengers in someone else's story. So to quote that again, he says, self-esteem is inseparable from one's acts and one's power to act. If we are limited in executive behavior toward the object world, we are ipso facto low in self-esteem. We then have to contrive we have to contrive it somehow, meaning contrive self-esteem, make self-esteem out of nothing, create self-esteem inauthentically, build a house of cards, a character for ourselves that isn't actually true. The record of that contriving is what we mean largely by, I'm not going to say what he refers to here, but what he's getting at is that if your self-esteem isn't rational and real and authentic, you're going to find some false way to build it. And that's exactly what I think Brian is doing right now. He may be feeling feelings of self-esteem, but it's built on foul play. It's built on what appear to be criminal acts, and so it's not genuine or authentic in the real sense of the word. It's certainly a contrivance that had its thing in Fight Club. Fight Club shows how that contrivance can be quite fun and good and adventurous and appealing and cool. But look at what happened at the end of that. Brian seems to be quite caught up in that story. It's not sustainable, yeah. Freya Moon says self-esteem build on likes in social media. Absolutely. So, you can have a person who says, I've got social power, or I've got self-esteem based on so many people following me on social media. That's not real. It's symbolic. There may be some reality attached to it, but the real self-esteem is from your actions. Ed Golfer says, Brian's a skinny guy, he won't last long out there. Okay, guys, my voice is, I think, had about enough of this conversation. My voice, not me. So I think I'm going to finish my app. I'm going to say goodbye to you guys. I hope you found the last bit from Ernest Becker quite interesting. Remember, you can also apply it to yourself. Self-esteem informs all of our actions. So if you take a particular course of action, ask yourself, is my self-esteem causing the shots here? Right? And maybe I need to work on my self-esteem to make better decisions. Okay, let me take a bite of apple. Sackville B says, I bet Brian's working on a book. Joe Terry says, go preserve your voice. I do need to do that. I'm sorry if I've got food on me or whatever. Maggie says, well done, thank you. Truth set free, good night here. Thanks a lot. It's 2:45 in the morning where I am, so quite late. Grandma Green, see you next time. Thanks for the live. Thanks for that. I just want to thank my mods. Stephanie, thanks for being here. All the patrons from Patreon that I know a lot of you, Kelly, SM Kowalinsky, and so on. Sharon, good to have you here. Jean, thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for all the super chats. If there were any that I missed, I'm sorry. If you ask questions that I missed, leave them in the comments. I read almost all the comments, so I will get to them. And so, yeah, goodbye to Pauline, Jennifer Riggs, Juicy and Joyful, Sandra Kay, Matthew Grogan, Mamachi, E. Miller, thanks for that, E. Miller. Rebecca, Water Dog, thanks for that. Bob and Laura, L12, Donna Roberts, Lisa Schmidt, Caroline K. Sorry, I can't get to everybody, but thank you very much. If you haven't left a like, please do. And if there's something you want me to cover that I haven't covered yet, I've got quite a few ideas, but if there's something you feel that hasn't really been addressed, let me know in the comments and I'll check it out. I'm talking about the comments under the description. Okay, that is it for me. Thank you for listening, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.